Welcome to another episode of Zwick's Flicks, the Ed Zwick podcast. I am truly honored and grateful to have today's guest co-host on. I have Craig Cohen, Mr. Craig Cohen. He is the original podfather. For those that know. For those that don't know, it doesn't really matter. Because Craig, it's just a pleasure to have you. I've podcasted with you a few times before on other projects. First and foremost, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Craig, you came on today and you picked this film. What is your history with Ed Zwick, if any? What do you think of his films overall?
It's interesting because until you started doing this show, I never really sort of took a high-level look at Ed Zwick as a filmmaker. It was a guy whose like name I knew, and when I went back and looked, I'm like, there was a run of films that I went and saw every film in the theater. And I'm not probably being fair there because there was a time period in my life where I think a lot of guys, when we were in our early 20s, we just went to the movies.
Sure,
it was a different time period. You didn't have streaming. You didn't have access to movies. So on a Thursday night, you would just go to the movies and see what was ever out. Sometimes you'd see two movies. Whatever movie he made after The Last Samurai, I'm not even sure I know.
Was Legends of the Fall the first one you saw of his in the theater? Or did you think you saw Glory in the theater?
You know what? Full disclosure here, I've never seen Glory.
Oh, you haven't seen Glory yet?
No, it's my movie of shame, and yeah.
You spill my heart. Well, no, wow.
Well, let me amend that.
You're a film nut. You are a film nut. I don't mean to expose you, Podfather, but what's going on here?
If this is another thing, aside from like Westerns, I'm not a real big pre-1900 type movies that are set pre like 1900. So unless it's like a Civil War like era Western, it just
like Dance with Wolves, for example. You've seen that.
Yeah,
but it's not a Civil War film per se.
Yeah,
right?
It's a hole in my filmography that I need to address.
Well, we are addressing it. We're talking about it right now.
Yeah, it's just an issue I have, and it's completely a Craig issue. It's just hard for me to get into films like that.
No, that's fine. Look, and I'm not going to shame you, just a little bit. I'm going to challenge you to watch it with your wife one day. You really got to see Glory. I mean, in fact, we're going to do 2 more movies together on this podcast show, the Ed Zwick show.
So before one of those, I'll have watched it.
I think the audience would like to hear your thoughts as a first-time viewer and a film. You're a film guy, so I'm actually genuinely curious what you think of the film. So I think it should be, look, it's not a hard film to watch. So let's just say watch the film, and I would like to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, I know all the beats because I listened to the episode, and I got to hear all the excitement surrounding, Matthew Broderick's mom sort of being a nuisance.
She was a lovely woman. Lovely for Ed.
Getting to hear you discover that like Matthew Broderick killed somebody.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever knew that.
With Jennifer Grey in the car. Like he killed 2 people. Yeah.
He killed 2 people. I think he was getting service in the car. I'm not joking. Because they weren't drunk. I think they were doing something else in the car. And he was distracted.
Yeah, no, it's funny because they just put out within the last couple of months, like I'm a 4K guy. I'm sure you've seen on Facebook, we talk about 4K and everything. They put out recently like a brand new 4K of Glory, which from everything I've read is supposed to be just phenomenal. And the thing I love about 4K is it's really the closest you can get to being in the theater. I remember a couple months ago, I picked up Blade on 4K. Blade is a movie I had on DVD. I never upgraded to Blu-ray. I put the 4K in and I sat down and started watching it. And I saw Blade in the theater like probably 6 times.
Sure. Oh, wow. Okay.
And I was like, oh my God, I never thought I would get to see Blade like this again. I mean, it looks, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever sat down like and watched a true 4K.
Just through streaming, not through the hardware. I think the hardware is a little bit better than streaming 4K, is it not?
Yeah.
But yes, 4K streaming I have, yes.
Yeah. It's phenomenal. And it's been amazing for film and film preservation.
Right.
And the funniest thing about it, too, is people are so used to watching like shitty transfers of films. And they don't realize that like films from the 30s or 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s can look good. They're like, it looks like it was shot yesterday. And my thinking is always like, yeah, it was shot on film that was properly preserved and just hadn't been properly scanned for a home video release ever. It's always funny that people have these notions that like a movie made in the 30s is supposed to look like shit. Well, no, it's not. I mean, if the filmmakers were competent, the negative's gonna look great.
Well, which brings me to your podcast you're doing right now. Well, I should say this. I totally stole your idea. I stole your idea. So why don't you tell the audience what podcast you do? And secondly, regarding your talk about film and how it looks, it was actually my guest spot on your show where I rewatched a film that I haven't seen in 30 years, but saw a lot as a teenager and in my early 20s. But, I guess 20, 25 years later, I haven't seen the film in 20, 25 years. So I saw it in 4K or whatever, high def at least, but watched The Untouchables as a hint here. I watched it on my 4K TV. And it looked so good. I was like, I don't remember, because last time I saw it was on a tube TV, probably 1996.
Yeah,
so now
square image.
Yeah, sure, square image. Yeah. So it's such a beautiful looking film. They had films look like this. So exactly like you're describing, I'm naively watching this older film that I've seen many times, and I'm recognizing, boy, it looks sharp. It looks good. So Craig, what is the podcast you're doing right now?
It's called the G.O.A.T, a Brian De Palma fan podcast, and the theory or thesis I'm trying to present during the course of the show is that Brian De Palma is America's greatest living director. I'm not sure I 100% believe that, but when you catch me at the right point, I 100% believe it. Brian De Palma does two things. He makes really, really good films. He takes big swings, and anytime you take a big swing, you're bound to have some glorious strikeouts. Any good filmmaker, if they don't have one or two bad movies in their filmography,
right,
then something's wrong, because nobody's gonna ever bat 1,000.
No, good point. Yeah. Good
so
point.
At least my history with podcasting. I've been podcasting for a long time.
Yeah.
I came out of my last podcast, Conversations at Jackrabbit Slim's, kind of satisfied that I had done what I wanted with that show. And I did a bunch of guest spots, including guest spots on your shows. I love podcasting. I love sitting down and talking with people and connecting. And I've made so many connections, you included, through podcasting. But I hate all the other shit that comes with podcasting.
I know.
The preparation, the post-production work.
It's a lot of work.
So I thought, how can I do something that will allow me to have this sort of balance where I'm able to still spend time with my wife and my pets and my other hobbies? That's not going to be all encompassing, because, maybe some of your listeners know, at its height when I was doing the Slycast, we were doing, episodes that were 2.5 hours long. And when you've got 4 people talking for 2.5 hours, that's a lot of editing.
Yeah.
So I would spend hours editing the show, and it just became just such a burden. So I said, what can I do to sort of make a show that works for me? I have a short commute to work. So I was like, I'm in the car for maybe 12 minutes going to and from work every day. And I'm like, I'm sure a lot of people listen to podcasting when they commute. So I was like, what if I did something that was on the shorter end, 15 to 30 minute long episodes? And that sort of got me really energized, because I'm like, yeah, I can edit 30 minutes of audio, no problem. At that same point, I was really sort of rediscovering Brian De Palma. In my film world, everything I think traces back to Quentin Tarantino.
Right.
I think it was probably listening to his Video Archives podcast that he does with Roger Avery, where they talk about De Palma a lot.
Interesting.
And I was like, oh, you know what? Let me watch Blowout again. Let me watch Dressed to Kill again. And it became this thing where I was like, aside from the fact that you can tell Tarantino's heavily influenced by De Palma, I was like, De Palma's filmography, much like Ed Zwick's, is super diverse. Mm-hmm. A lot of filmmakers just get caught in this rut where they're like, Wes Craven is known as the horror guy. Brian De Palma made horror movies, but he somehow got out of that and made one of the greatest gangster flicks of all time in Scarface. So I was like, let me explore that. So the concept of the show as it exists right now, every episode I sit down with a friend or a fellow podcaster, let them pick a scene in a particular De Palma film, and just talk about that scene and why it's great and what makes it part of a great movie. You said we did The Untouchables. We did that amazing church scene between Kevin Costner and Sean Connery. So every episode, it's about 20 to 30 minutes just talking through a scene and the overall picture in general, sort of argue for why Brian De Palma is the great director that he is.
Well, thanks for lowering your standards and coming on an Ed Zwick podcast. I appreciate it. I don't know where Ed Zwick stands in the pantheon of directors. It's just, as people know who've listened to the show already, and I said it at my intro video kind of describes it, but just generally speaking, it just seems to be that I've enjoyed a good chunk of Zwick's flicks throughout the years, and I'm like, who is this guy? What else has he done that I missed? And so this journey has been a combination of watching films that I haven't seen of his yet, which I did with like Leaving Normal and About Last Night, for example, right off the bat, and some of his later films too. And I think this might be his ratio, though. I will say, and I'm not just because I'm doing his podcast, but he's batting pretty good. His quality of films, even the ones that were box office bombs, Leaving Normal was a bomb. It's a good film.
Yeah.
Good. I'm still kind of waiting for his bad film, a film where I'm like, oof, maybe it's coming, these later films. But Craig, Last Samurai, not it.
Oh, no, not at all. And did we ever discover what that movie I was thinking of is? Is it The Siege?
Oh, he did The Siege with Bruce Willis.
Okay, that's the one I was thinking of. And you did that with Doug, right?
I did The Siege with Scott from the
from
Men of Action Park.
Yeah, and Church of Tarantino and
yeah.
But The Siege is the one where like they declare martial law, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the one I was thinking. For some reason, I thought it was called The Last Castle, which is another movie.
James Gandolfino, which I've seen. I think wasn't Robert Redford in that as well?
Yeah. I got those movies confused. Sort of like I got like Legends of the Fall and that Fly Fish, a River Runs Through It mixed up. I think
I don't know how you got that mixed up. You told me that in a chat, and I still don't understand it.
Well, they're both Brad Pitt, right?
So what? They're such different films. I can't even handle it. But that's okay. Okay.
Are you going to do a sidecast where you cover My So-Called Life?
It's not a bad idea. I've wondered where my Ed Zwick stuff will end. Like the idea is it's a miniseries. That's kind of how I want to tackle it. He's got 13 films that he directed that went to the theater. That's it. That's all. Or feature films, you want to call it. Some do go to streaming. I think one of his last films might have just been streaming only. However, the idea being that these are feature films, not made for TV. He did a couple TV films, not interested. I want, About Last Night was his first feature film for like the big screen. He's produced films. As you know, he is an Academy Award winner. He's a producer for Shakespeare in Love. He won an Academy Award for that film. He produced Traffic, I Am Sam. He executive produced The Birth of a Nation in 2016. Tons of TV stuff. 30-something was one that I was kind of interested in. That ran for 4 years.
Yeah, I think that's probably hard to find, though. Like, I don't think that's streaming anywhere.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. So Last Samurai, I saw in the theaters. I'm probably 90% sure you saw it in the theaters.
It was actually until this viewing, it was the last time I saw it was in the theater. And it's funny because my wife loves this movie. So we've had the Blu-ray sitting downstairs for years.
You pulled it out and put it in the old player there?
Of course, yeah. And you know what, man? I got to tell you, that Blu-ray is loaded.
With extras?
Yeah, it's got like 17-minute chat between Zwick and Cruz.
Oh, wow.
Looks like it was filmed around the time of the movie. Like they had just finished it, or it's got like an Ed Zwick video journal. It's got a commentary track.
Wow.
It's loaded. I was like, wow, this is a really, really loaded Blu-ray. Yeah, I saw it in theaters. Remember really, really digging it in theaters. Yeah, I hadn't watched it again until we sat down the other night to watch it for this recording.
So let's talk about a couple of things from the film. So I actually watched it with my kids. I have 10-year-old twins and my 12-year-old son. So boy-girl twins and 12-year-old son. And my wife and I, we all watched it last weekend in preparation for the podcast to rewatch it, of course, for myself. But also, like, my kids are watching these type of films. We watch older films for them, but like we watched like Forrest Gump. We watched The Green Mile. We watched these heavy films. I think they're really important for them when they love these non-CGI films. That's what I love, is to watch my kids watch non-CGI films, and they get to really experience the aesthetic of these films that are story driven, character driven, acting driven. And my 10-year-old son is a huge Tom Cruise fan. He Top Gun films. He loves the Mission Impossible films. So speaking of Brian De Palma, he's watched the first one. He loves them all.
He's our Harrison Ford.
He understands that Tom's a little bit older, like he's 60 now, but he's really loving watching. The next Tom Cruise we're going to watch, he hasn't seen yet, will be Far and Away. That'll be the next one we watch.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I also am a Tom Cruise fan. We're going to get to him last, so let's just tease it. He'll be the last actor that we discuss regarding this film. But the one thing that while I was watching this with the family recently that occurred to me is how much there was an era that started around Legends of the Fall, Dances with Wolves even, but there was an era of film, Craig. I don't know if there's a term or a era that was named where we had these sweeping epic films, and doggone it, I miss it.
Yeah,
I miss these epic, like Troy. There were these sweeping sandal films and Gladiator in 2000. You get like there was a 10-year period where we were getting these sweeping epic films, and I really miss them.
Yeah, I think it's part of that ebb and flow of Hollywood. Where something hits, and everybody else decides to get on that train. Or there's that theory that good ideas are just bound to happen. And that sometimes you'll see two people that come up with very similar ideas, completely separate from each other. It's just like the universe was ready for it. Because there was that resurgence of Westerns in like the 90s where we got like Tombstone, Unforgiven, Open Range.
Open Range, don't get me started. Like, can I get me excited for that Western podcast I always talk about doing, because I love Westerns. And Open Range, unsung film. That film is so overlooked. It's incredible film.
Yeah. Ryan, I've been thinking a lot about your Western podcast because I've been watching the Dollars trilogy on 4K, the Sergio Leone.
Yeah.
So I've been watching those. But you know what I think would be really cool is if you sort of break that podcast out into the historical timeline of the Old West. So start in whatever year you want to start in, 1860 or whatever, and then find movies that chronologically take place during the course of the Old West.
That's insane. I get what you're saying, but holy research, man. You're talking about the research before a show. You're killing me.
No, you just find out like when Young Guns,
Billy the Kid era.
Yeah, like it's not that hard. And then you just pick. I'm the type of person that gets really into it. So I would be like, okay, we're going to do a complete chronological look at the Old West over 100 films or whatever. But just take the Westerns you want to talk about, but break them out in a timeline. You're able to sort of look at the historical progression of the Old West. You could almost end with the Wild Bunch or whatever, where they determine that like the development of the Gatling gun sort of brought an end to the Old West. Because we've got that beautiful ballet of violence at the end of the Wild Bunch where the Gatling gun becomes the ultimate.
That's actually used in
this movie too. Yeah, very effectively. I'm very into your Western podcast, and if I would love to be involved, however you want me to be involved. If you want me to be an executive producer, the one thing about podcasting I always look for is looking to fill a gap that other people haven't filled.
I have envisioned a Western podcast network the same way with the Last of the Action Heroes. I think it's big enough that there could be multiple there could be a person that handles the horror Westerns. There could be a person that handles the black and white Westerns. There could be a person that I kind of envision that there could be a Western net podcast network.
Yeah, like even contemporary Westerns, like, John Carpenter's Vampires, he considers that a Western, or The Ghost of Mars is another one he considers a Western.
Yeah, stuff like that.
I'm all on board for it, man, because I love that genre. But getting back to things, Hollywood ebbs and flows, and there was that period, and it might be the last time we ever see it, which is a shame, but who knows? Gladiator 2's coming out.
I was just going to say Gladiator 2 might ironically, it might re-spark it. I'm looking forward to that. I can't wait. We're going to watch Gladiator, the first film, as a family in preparation for Gladiator 2. We might just see that in the theaters. I'm going to take a chance. I got a feeling Gladiator 2 will be just fine. I've said before, I can't imagine Ridley Scott's going to destroy the legacy. I think he's aware of that. I think he's going to give us a fun film.
He's another great filmmaker that has taken big swings and has confounding misses.
Flops.
There was a period where I went through a big Ridley Scott phase.
Yes. Oh yeah, me too. Okay. What were your thoughts on the score of this film? Speaking of sweeping epics, we got a sweeping score by Hans Zimmer. What do you think?
Anytime I sit down to podcast, especially with you, I focus more on the score because I know that's going to be a point of discussion. I tried to get real nitpicky with this score. There's no theme running throughout the film that I remember.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, the music's really effing effective, especially during the end where the massacre's happening and we see emotion on people's faces. Strip the music away from that scene. It's not going to make you feel the way that scene makes you feel. Yeah. So it did its job. But at the same time, it's not a score I'm going to rush out and say, oh, I need to listen to the theme from The Last Samurai again. It's not iconic. But at the same time, not every film score needs to be iconic. It needs to serve the film.
Perfectly said. I agree. We talk about Glory. And when Doug and I covered Glory, that was one of our biggest applauding of that film was the score alone makes me want to cry. You play the score from your CD, which I owned. I think I still own. Actually, I say I owned. I still own the CD. I bought the soundtrack. I love the score, so I just listened to the boys' choir. When the score is so good that you visualize the film in your mind and you're moved by the music. Last of Mohicans is a great example of that as well. So there's certain scores that when I hear the score, I'm just like, oh, I know, and I start to like well up or feel the emotion. Yeah. So this film, no, there's no part of the score here where I felt that same type of emotion in the sense of Like, I didn't get welled up. I didn't get that kind of feel, even though people died, characters that we liked died. That wasn't the purpose of this film. It wasn't necessarily, it wasn't designed to make you get all kind of teary-eyed like Legends of the Fall and Glory. Those type of films kind of tugged at the heartstrings. This one doesn't tug at the heartstrings so much, or like Gladiator, of course, end of Gladiator. That music, end of Gladiator, you hear that, you start crying without, you just listen to that end song. I forget what it's called, but it's amazing. You start welling up, right? So, totally agree with you. A very effective soundtrack. My 12-year-old son, and that sound kind of came in the big triumph, and my son was like kind of moving to it, like he was reacting to the score as the score would do. But you're right. But when that scene is over, when the time has passed, you're not going back to the score. Yeah,
but you got to the idea of like not being too emotionally moved. And I think the thing about this movie, Ryan, is if you look at the overall theme of the movie, it's really about honor. A lot of the deaths in this movie aren't sad because they're tied into a character doing what they think is the honorable thing.
Excellent point, Craig. Yeah, that could very well be. You never considered any of their deaths, I would say, tragic. I mean, death is never we never get excited. Yay, they died. But you're right, because they view the way they view death, and they're at peace with death, and it's an honorable death, kind of very Klingon speak of Star Trek. For them, it's like, no, I'm dying with honor. I'm not afraid. I did everything I was supposed to do. So everyone that kind of dies, you're like, they'll die doing what they were sworn to do, their duty.
You see it most of all. I mean, you've got this incredibly complex relationship between Cruz, the wife of the samurai he killed, and her son. If this was an American story, that triangle would be very different. Whereas here, he apologizes to her, she accepts the apology, and she's able to do a lot of things you would never do for the man that killed your husband. And at the same time, the son understood that his dad died doing the honorable thing, and that at the same time connects to the Cruz character in a way that he doesn't want to lose him the way he lost his dad. Right. And instead of resentment and hatred, it's just like, hey, you've been a good force in my life, even though you took my dad. I don't want you to go away as well.
Yeah, that was a great relationship writing. And speaking of the writing, it was written by a guy. Have you heard of this guy, John Logan?
John Logan. He also, from what I remember, he wrote Gladiator.
Yeah, this guy has had quite the career.
There's a great Lou Diamond Phillips movie called Bats, which I didn't know that he
that
wrote.
Was his first film. That was his first film.
Bats is awesome, and I know you talked about Lou Diamond Phillips on the Courage Under Fire episode. And how much you like him. If you haven't seen Bats, it's sort of it's another one I haven't seen since theaters, but that's a movie I left the theater. I'm like, man, did exactly what it was supposed to do for a movie called Bats.
I forgot about that film. I've seen the film. I saw it on VHS back in the day. It came out in 99. I did see it because I'm a Lou fan. Little did I know that the writer of Bats would also give us Any Given Sunday, which I saw in the theaters.
Oliver Stone, another filmmaker who I absolutely adore.
Yeah, me too.
Made a sweeping epic in Alexander, which has 3 different cuts.
Great film.
There's 3 cuts of Alexander.
As long as it keeps showing the Rosario Dawson naked in each one, that's all.
And I think he also was involved in some of the Daniel Craig Bond movies.
Then he wrote, if I had to do a top 5 film listing, Craig, I would have a hard time not putting this in. I don't know what would knock this one out. Gladiator. I have loved Gladiator since day one when I saw it in the theaters. It is a film that I measure these epic type films too. It has everything: action, acting, the direction, groundbreaking. I remember people were saying, I can't believe they're making a sword and sandal film. It was mocked and ridiculed the same way that Titanic was. But really, not only did he accomplish one of the best films ever made, he had grown men around the world crying, and this film wins Best Picture. I just love that this film did what Titanic did in some degree, meaning do you remember the naysayers about this film being made?
Gladiator was a movie that I can't remember a time much before it. I know when Terminator 2 came out, me and my brother planned for that. I took off work. This was a movie. It came out on May 5th, Cinco de Mayo here. I'm going to go get a nice Mexican dinner, and then I'm going to see Gladiator. And this was probably 2 months out. It might have been that I was really into Ridley Scott at that point. But yeah, I remember just the overall excitement around that movie. There's always naysayers because, again, like Titanic, I was one of the Titanic naysayers. Before I realized you just never bet against James Cameron. That guy knows what audience wants. And Gladiator was exactly the same way. I mean, it was, again, there hadn't been a sword and sandal movie in a long time. It took off. There was a lot of hype surrounding that too, because it was really when CG was really starting to become a selling tool for movies. Because I remember promotional featurettes and stuff where they did like that 360 shot of the Coliseum, and they're like, here's how we shot it, and it's empty. And then all of a sudden there's 60,000 people in the stands.
Look at the CGI extras in there that they weren't.
Yeah, like probably the peak of CGI being used as a selling tool for movies before it sort of became like a cheap sort of tool.
But at the same time, actually, Lord of the Rings came out.
Yeah,
the idea being that we're not using CGI to sell our movie, we're using CGI to tell our story.
Yeah, but the other thing that's great about the Lord of the Rings movies and Peter Jackson in general is he embraced every technology. So in the Lord of the Rings movies, you still got matte paintings, you've still got miniatures.
Yeah.
But it's all integrated together. So
trick filming too, like
the depth of field, so you can make Gandalf look really
tall.
big and Frodo look really small. So it's just like, what's the best way to tell the story? It's a shame, Ryan, because nowadays, and we've talked about this on other episodes on the Last of the Action Heroes podcast network, it's just default. You're going to do it in CG, and nobody tries to figure things out anymore. And I think that gets back to your kids and how they respond to these older films, because I've always said that when you watch, let's use Fast and the Furious 10 as an example, your mind knows it's not real. Your mind knows that everything that's being done is being done inside of a computer, and it's just a bunch of ones and zeros that spit out an image. When you watch an older movie that's got practical effects, your mind is processing in a way where it says, wow, this car that's about to do a roll, somebody is in that car executing that role. So I think psychologically, there's a difference between watching a CGI film and a film that's got practical effects. And it's cool that your children are responding to it the way they're supposed to, as opposed to being like, wow, you can tell that's fake. They're fake in different ways.
The entertainment part of the brain, whatever appreciates the aesthetic of real versus CGI, they actually like Indiana Jones falling off his horse versus maybe Harry Potter on the broom. Aesthetically, they kind of like the real more than the CGI.
Well, it's got also the potential for more personality. Let's talk about like King Kong, the original King Kong. It's a stop motion puppet that doesn't even look the same throughout the course of the movie. But that ape has a ton of personality. Yeah, and that's the artist that was doing every frame of that stop motion gave that character the personality it has. And I'm not saying you can't do that with CGI. It's just a lot harder to see.
Going back to John Logan, but talk about CGI working well. Then you have, of course, Andy Serkis doing the Gollum, where you use the CGI, but you're still using the human part of the acting, that he still brings that character.
Yeah, the motion capture.
They use CGI to make the creature, but it's still the human element that does the acting. Okay, what this guy's written: The Aviator, incredible film. Sweeney Todd, he did Rango, that animation film with Gore Verbinski. He wrote for Ralph Fiennes. He did Skyfall. Okay, Skyfall, probably the best Bond film ever made. He wrote that for Sam.
He also wrote one of the worst Bond films ever made.
Okay, well, we're not going to talk about Spectre, okay? That's not the point. The point is, he wrote Skyfall, okay? He also wrote again for Ridley, Alien Covenant, not too shabby. And he's working on a film right now with Antoine Fuqua. They're doing a biography on Michael Jackson.
Oh, wow. He also started out like writing plays, right?
He did some play work, yeah. Right up until before his first film, right up to 1996, he did about 5 or 6 plays. And then he's done some plays that are like Moulin Rouge, for example. He redid that as a play in 2019.
Ed actually gets an on-screen co-write credit for this movie.
What he's done in all of his films, it seems like so far, if he doesn't get the credit on the screen because of all that legality of issues, he has a hand in the writing regardless.
And any director's going to do that, or any director that's worth a damn. De Palma's the same way. The guild rules, Ryan, are like, it has to be a certain percentage of the script that is credited to you. Well, if you change 3 lines of dialogue, you're not altering the structure of that film, right? All you're doing is changing the way a line is said. And that's always what's sort of funny to me when people talk about writing credits is, and the same thing happens with songwriting too. They're like, oh, so-and-so did such a great drum beat on this song. Why aren't they considered a writer? Well, they didn't do anything with the structural content of that song. They provided a part. And it's the same thing with movies. Unless you're providing a noticeable percentage of structural change to a movie, all your writing is really doing at that point is augmenting or amplifying stuff that the original writer did. And writing credits are really, really interesting. There was famously Terry Gilliam, another madman filmmaker who I adore.
Yeah.
He did Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Yeah. Still haven't seen it. Don't know when I will, if I ever will.
So that was based on a novel by Hunter S. Thompson.
Yeah.
And it was previously, they attempted to adapt it with Alex Cox, who did Repo Man. And there was a bunch of arbitration when that movie came out. And Alex Cox and his screenwriting partner argued and won screenplay credit for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And Terry Gilliam's point was like, it's based on a book. Of course, we're going to have similar scenes. So I'm not saying they always get it right, but for the most part, I did notice, Ryan, because you've talked about it on the previous episode, I did take note of the fact that Zwick had that official on-screen co-writing credit.
Yeah, he hasn't had one in a while. You're right about that. Okay, so that's your writing credits. Of course, we know who directed the film. We talked about the score. Let's get into some of the actors here. Some interesting bit players. One that came up right away when this individual came onto the screen. I haven't seen this movie in a while. I'm not going to lie. I don't watch films over and over again 100 times. I just don't have enough time in my life or any kind of given day. Was Billy Connolly playing Sergeant Zebulon Gant at the very beginning of the film. What did you think of Billy's performance as Sergeant Zebulon Gant?
It was fine. And I mean, I think a lot of people probably know him more for like comedic roles.
Is he a stand-up comedian? Is he a comedian? He was a comedian.
I don't know if it made its way up to Canada, but there was a show with Howard Hessman called Head of the Class. That's where Robin Gibbons came from.
Oh, yes.
And when Howard Hessman left Head of the Class, they replaced him with Billy Connolly.
Yeah, only for 22 episodes, apparently.
Yeah.
So
I've always known him more as like a comedic actor. Sure. He was fine here. His character did what he was supposed to do. Yeah, I don't have anything good or bad to say about the performance.
Yeah, I found it an interesting casting. Ed didn't talk about him necessarily in the audiobook about why they chose him or kind of what brought Billy to this epic of a sweeping type film other than his Irish-American background. They try to give him some sort of Irish-American background.
Yeah, when it comes to casting movies like this,
he's Scottish. He was, I believe he's Scottish. Yes.
The look is more important than anything else.
Yeah, he looks the part. When you watch Glory, this is the only disappointing thing why you kind of not mad at you, but only slightly disappointed that you haven't seen Glory, is there's a couple beats in this film that mirror Glory quite closely. One of them is there's a Irish drill sergeant in Glory that yells at the black troops and gets them in order. And that's exactly the same type of character that Billy is in this film that the Irish Scottish guy was in the Glory film. Now, you could argue it's about the same time or the 1800s, so they just kind of recruited people from that area of the world to become drill sergeants. Very similar characters and the way they presented. One thing that came to my mind watching this film was when Tom Cruise's character hands over his journals to the photographer dude, the journalist photographer guy, the historian of sorts that was living in Japan for quite some time. I forget his name off the top of my head.
Timothy Spall is the actor.
That's right. He plays Simon Graham. That's right. Yeah. He was a British photographer and scholar hired as an interpreter for the Captain Algren, played by Tom Cruise, and his non-English speaking soldiers. Okay, so he was kind of like a translator between the soldiers and Algren. He lived in Japan for some time. Anyways, he was handed the journals before the final battle.
Captain Algren.
Mr. Graham. Perhaps you can use these for your book.
Yes, I will. Captain, Godspeed.
Mr. Graham.
And Matthew Broderick his character did the exact same thing in Glory, handed his letters to the journalist that was there. It was almost like beat for beat the exact same.
That's a filmmaking.
Is it cliche?
It's a way to justify your voiceover, because voiceover in film is really, really hard. Because a lot of times people are like, where is this voice coming from? Why are we hearing it? It's done really good in movies and it's done really bad in movies. Goodfellas is probably one of the best examples of it. In this movie, it's a way to explain away why we're listening to Tom Cruise explain things. And a lot of times people criticize voiceover because it tells instead of shows.
it does help explain some beats of the film where you're already looking at 2 hour plus film. You could have easily made this into a miniseries, 8-episode miniseries. This could have easily been dragged out. The character developments were very well done. And speaking of character developments, let's just say, I've said this before, but every episode I've done of Ed so far, or of his movies that I've reviewed so far for this podcast, he does a great job of handling and guiding the viewer into everyone's character. Like, there's no character in this film where you don't really feel something, whether it's the Emperor's son, not the Emperor's son, sorry, the samurai leader, but he wasn't the Emperor. Ken Wanabe's his own son, and then the Emperor himself, I should say, all these characters, and then the ones that were trying to manipulate the Japanese Emperor. Every one of these characters, you kind of sensed in a very brief scenes, their whole characters, how they are, almost like what they're doing off screen. Like every time they were shown again, you weren't jostled. I remembered you from the previous scene. Ed, I think it's got to be him, because it's film after film after film with Ed Zwick's directing, where I, as a viewer, I'm not lost. Not only am I not lost with who these characters are, they're all so uniquely shown and developed. I understand what's going on. I'm not lost, and my kids aren't lost by who these characters are. You're invested in whether it's good or bad or even indifferent. You know who they are. The one character that comes to mind that the kids just fell in love with right away, Japanese samurai guard that he had falling around. His name was Bob. Remember, Tom Cruise says, "I'm going to call you Bob," because he didn't want to give his name. He wouldn't tell him his name.
I just realized I've been remiss. Forgive me. I have yet to thank you for looking out for me yesterday. That is your job, correct? Protecting me. Well done, Bob. You don't mind if I call you Bob, do you? I knew Bob once. God, he was ugly as a mule. You ladies' man, Bob?
And my kids, of course, called him Bob throughout the film, and they knew that Bob was going to die. And so even when Bob dies in the final battle, they're like, "Oh no, not Bob!" The kids were invested in Bob, who barely had any lines, but he was this side character that even my kids were following. They were invested in this storyline of Bob, the bodyguard who followed Tom Cruise around.
It's a matter of just giving enough information to make a character memorable. It's almost like working with a template or something. It definitely seems like that is something that Zwick is very, very good at.
Okay, so the next character we have of note, of course, was Tony Goldwyn. When his character came out, so of course we all know Tony Goldwyn. Wasn't he the bad guy in Ghost?
He was the bad guy in Ghost. He was also the bad guy in that Arnold Schwarzenegger classic, The Sixth Day. And I say classic, tongue in cheek.
Some people have that face. I know. Bad person.
Yeah, he also made his debut in, because I've just watched them all recently, in like one of the Friday the 13th movies, part 6 or 7. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
And then also he was the voice of Tarzan in Disney's Tarzan, which...
There you go. He played a good guy there, at least. He kind of has that face where you kind of cast him as...
It's a bad guy.
Yeah.
And there's that great scene between him and Tom Cruise's character where he's like, "Oh, you're alive." They have a little face-to-face, and then Tom Cruise is like, on the battlefield, "I'm going to look for you first."
Good God. Sir, the Imperial Army of Japan demands your surrender. If you and your fellows lay down your arms, you will not be harmed.
This is not possible, as Mr. Omura knows.
Captain Algren, we will show you no quarter. You ride against us, and you are the same as they are.
I'll look for you on the field.
That's great movie making. You know what's going to happen, but still, it's that moment. He says what he's going to do, and then he does it. Well, Tony Goldwyn, he's a
great actor.
Good actor, and I think you're right. I mean, he's sort of able to lean into playing a certain type.
And embrace it. It gives you a career. You know, he's made a career out of it. You look at his filmography, and a lot of the roles, especially on film, seem to be kind of the the creep or the bad guy, but he does play DA Nicholas Baxter on Law and Order right now. So apparently, if you're a DA, you're probably quote unquote the good guy. So there you go. But he was also in Oppenheimer, which is my least favorite, worst of the best podcast episode right now. My least favorite Christopher Nolan film is Oppenheimer. I
haven't seen Oppenheimer.
It's boring.
It's been in my queue to watch.
Sorry, I know people are going to get so mad at me for saying that. It's almost like you can't say that. It took me like it's a 3-hour film. So I literally watched it like 15 to 20 minutes at a time. I was like watching it like documentary style. I'm going to watch 20 minutes now, 20 minutes tomorrow. And maybe people say, "Well, that's why, Ryan." Well, no, I just watched this 2.5-hour movie with my kids. We weren't bored 1 second. So I'm sorry. Oppenheimer's boring. Last Samurai, not boring. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm being
Yeah.
truthful. Like, people get mad at you for being truthful. I'm sorry. Maybe you put Tom Cruise in Oppenheimer, and I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
There might have been some life in that film. Okay, now we're going to get to the top two now. I don't know how to say his name very well. I'm sorry, but it is Ken Watanabe. Did I get that right?
Watanabe.
Watanabe. I think it's right.
Yeah,
Watanabe.
yeah.
I like that better. So I apologize to Mr. Ken. I'm just going to call him Ken. I'm sorry. Now, you might find this interesting, Craig. You might know this, or our listeners might find this interesting. This was his first English-speaking role.
Wow. I did not know that. And he was nominated for an Oscar.
He was nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah.
Good for him. And did you know this, too, that the Japanese, he owed some money. He was basically the Tom Cruise of Japan.
Yeah.
So he's a big actor in Japan. What's the name of the gang, the main gang?
The Yakuza?
Yeah. He owed money to them. And I forget why, but apparently he was on the hook for some money to some corrupt people for something. I don't know what. He didn't do anything corrupt himself, but he got tangled up in some sort of debt. And to pay off that debt, he had to do a lot of garbage films in Japan. And he hated doing it. Straight to video, whatever the equivalent for Japanese film at the time for, as you can see, a man of his talents in this film. He was like disgraced having to do these films. And I think for him to do this was just a way for him to really explode on screen. It was almost like I finally get to do a film of worth and note. What did you think of Ken's job on the film then?
I think he did a good job. I almost wish that he had spoken Japanese through the whole movie, because as good of a job as he did, there were still points where you struggled to sort of grasp what he was saying in English.
You didn't have the captions on?
Well, the subtitles came out when he spoke Japanese, but
I don't have captions on my films. All I hear is I'm not even joking. Our family all watches captions. That's the only thing I hate about going to the theater. It's like, for example, I saw Dune 2 in the theater. Incredible film. Amazing film. I can't wait for the third film. It's going to happen. I can't wait. So I'm watching Dune in the theater. The whole time is like, I don't know what one thing was said. I go home and I watch it streaming. I just watched it like recently, like a month ago on streaming. Yeah. I felt like it's a new film. And so I don't know how much dialogue people miss without captions. That's just,
you know what? I wonder if it's still a thing, because we don't really go to the movies much anymore. But there used to be something they had called, like, I think it was open captioning.
They still have it for people if you're hearing impaired, or you can pretend to be hearing impaired.
It's like a little mirror.
Their glasses.
Oh,
and
okay.
The captions are on the glasses.
Every once in a while when I went to the movies with my dad, who's got some hearing issues, there would be like a mirror that would be like right in front of your seat. That I guess it would pick up.
Oh, a mirror.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's right. I've never done it before, but I just I don't go to theaters for a couple of reasons. Now, one, because the movie it has to be worth it because they're so expensive. Dune was a film that was worth it. I find I just get more of the dialogue, so maybe that would have helped you if you had the English captions on, because you're right.
Yeah.
His accent was heavy, and the captions saved us.
Sure. He's a good actor. He's a one of those actors that's able to emote, do a lot with his face, do a lot with his eyes. Every moment in that film feels earned, especially the ending. The only thing I will say, and this will probably dovetail into the rest of the conversation, is why not Tom Cruise as well?
To do what, meaning?
Get nominated for an Oscar. Like, I mean,
we'll get to that. Let's put a bow on Ken here. His last film role was a couple of years ago, The Creator. Did you ever see that one?
That's a sci-fi movie, right?
Yeah, it was on Apple TV. I think it went to Apple.
It's a sci-fi movie, though, right?
It's a little rough. It's another one where it looks better than it. It's frustrating because it's an oddly boring, good-looking film. But he did a great job in his role in that film. I really enjoyed Ken in this. Of course, he was in Batman Begins, Letters of Iwo Jima, quite a few films since this time. But he seems like he's kind of gone back to doing TV roles, but probably better roles from now in his later years back in Japan. So he's doing that again. Yeah, I thought he did great. I think nominating him, I think it was generous. I don't think it was unwarranted. I'd have to see who he was up against at that time, because I don't think it was unwarranted, but I think he did an amazing job. Now, did you know that he was Lord Mortisugo Katsumoto?
Yeah.
Now, he wasn't, quote unquote, the last samurai. Did you know that the last samurai isn't a person, but it is the group of samurai?
I was thinking about the title of the movie. It's so funny that you mentioned that, because at first glance, if you pick up the Blu-ray on the shelf at the store, you're like, oh, this is another sort of whitewashing. Tom Cruise is the last samurai. So. But then after watching the movie, there is no specific person. It's the end of an era, end of a line of thinking, or a generation, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah.
Now, it's a little trickery with the words. I will say they do call it The Last Samurai, but we know it's pluralized. Samurai is the same plural as it is. It's a bit of a trickery by doing that because you have the last of the Mohicans, right? So we know it's not the last Mohicans. They kind of fool you a little bit. They want you to almost think, is it Tom Cruise? Is it the white guy? Is he the last samurai? Because in theory, spoiler alert, everyone gets wiped out but Tom. Okay, so it's a little bit of Tom does not get killed in this film. He has a no-kill clause, I swear, in his films. You know what the last film was that he was killed in?
The vampire movie he did?
Was he killed in that?
I don't know.
I don't think. No, he's not killed. He's Lestat.
Oh, Collateral.
Was he killed in that one?
He dies in Collateral, yeah.
Yes, right. He does. So he doesn't die often. It's kind of a joke. It's not really. He doesn't really have a no death clause. I say that kind of jokingly.
So what was the other movie?
Young Guns Part 1.
He's not even credited in that movie.
He has an uncredited cameo. You can actually see it on YouTube. I'm a huge Young Guns nerd. I know exactly where it is. But he was visiting his good friend Emilio Estevez on set, and they shot him.
Another amazing 4K, by the way.
I gotta get it. I know. There's
you
so
know
many.
who directed Young Guns? The director doesn't really matter. It's
I forget the name. Sorry, if I saw the name like in a multiple choice.
Well, Dean Kane's dad.
That's right.
The actor Dean Kane, who played Superman.
That's right. Yes.
Superman and Lois. His dad was, I guess, a director, like a journeyman director. But until I watched this for when I got the 4K a couple months ago, I was like, I had no idea that was Dean Kane's dad. But
yeah. Oh, I freaking love that film. Oh, that's such a good film. Okay, let's get to it. Tom Cruise. We have been teasing Tom. Even Ed has been teasing Tom in some of his audio portions of the book that we've shared so far. Tom Cruise. This is the first Tom Cruise film that I've ever really reviewed on any kind of podcast. I'm a Tom Cruise fan. I like what he does on film. The guy can act. He gives it his all, and it translates to what you see on screen. And my son's a Tom Cruise fan, like I said, and I didn't push that on him. He naturally became a Tom Cruise fan because it started with the Mission Impossible films, but other films I've shown him with Tom. He is a movie star, and maybe one of the last movie stars we have.
Absolutely. And I think on my Mission Impossible episode with Doug for the G.O.A.T, we talked about it. And I don't remember if I edited it out or not. But I've always been of the opinion that regardless of how you feel about Tom Cruise personally, when it comes to movies, you're never going to walk away from a Tom Cruise movie saying that was his paycheck movie. You can watch any other actor. A lot of them will tell you it's a paycheck movie, but Nick Cage is a great example. Nick Cage does paycheck movies. He's still capable of doing great work, but you can tell the movies that he didn't give a shit about.
Of course.
He showed up. Bruce Willis the entire end of his career were paycheck
25
movies.
films. I think it's 25 to 40 films, yeah.
But Tom Cruise, you cannot say that with. There's no movie. When Tom Cruise signs on to your movie, either a movie that he's developed or he's brought in to, you're never going to walk away from it saying he phoned it in or he didn't give a shit or he took the paycheck.
His work ethic is there, but there's a reason why he utilizes that work ethic into his films.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to spoil it because I just want to tell you, but Ed's going to tell us too, because he loves movies. The way someone would love motorcycles or loves fly fishing or whatever it is. Not only does he love movies, he wants you
to love movies.
To love movies too. So he has a thing that Ed will talk about, and the clips we're going to play at the end here about Tom, his work ethic. He talked about somebody else.
James Cameron.
Ironically, two people that are very polarizing personalities with the public and within the industry, ironically. But you can never say James dials it in. You can never say James Cameron phones it in with a movie. He gives it his all. Whether you like the film or not, you're not walking away thinking, well, that was a subpar effort. So there's a reason, because they both love movies in the film, and they have an idea. Like, they're able to say, I'm in this film. What is it that I'm doing that the person in the seat will experience? And they try to present that to the viewer while they're filming and making the film.
Since we're both such big fans, it's probably a good time to bring up, I think, another good example of this, at least for a window of his career. Stallone was really good at this too. And I think a great example is First Blood, where famously it wasn't an ego thing, but he knew that the character of John Rambo, as written in the book, if you translated it to that screen, would not get the audience sympathy. So that was a case of somebody knowing how to deliver a character to an audience. It takes, I think, a special kind of person to do that. And a lot of times you do have to sort of set your ego aside. because sometimes the right decision for the movie might not be the right decision for you.
So you brought up a great question. I think we both know the answer, and I'm not afraid to say because I'm not in the industry. I'm not going to rattle any cages. Yeah, Tom Cruise, the ever elusive, never will get an Oscar. I don't know what it is. He's kind of like, well, speaking of Stallone, he is like the actor that's not the Stallone wishes he could be. I don't mean it like that, but I mean the same way Stallone, for different reasons, is sort of slighted by the Academy. So when he does a film like Copland or even when he did Creed, like he was nominated, but he'll never win because when you have somebody like Stallone, who's a self-made half billionaire because of what he's created on his own empire, Tom is the same thing. He's created his own empire of films. People in the industry hate that. They're jealous because A, they don't have the money or the power that Tom has. He keeps showing up and keeps producing entertainment that people like, the public loves, and they hate that Tom Cruise does a film with Japanese actors and characters about samurai, wears a freaking samurai uniform, and he doesn't look stupid doing it. He doesn't look like he's culture appropriating. We want to say that he is, but he isn't, because it's done so well between the director, the writing, and the acting. People get mad at that. Oh, speaking of which, the Rotten Tomatoes score, or the critics score for this film, is 55% to the audience score of 80. What the frick does that tell you? That's political. That has nothing to do with the film. They're looking at it objectively because of his Scientology or whatever it is, because it's Tom Cruise. It's the Tom Cruise hate train, which I can't stand.
Yeah.
The film is good. You're lowering the film's score. Why? Why is the audience walking out giving it an A plus rating, but critics are like 55% rating? Sorry, that's my rant, but I think it's ridiculous and it's very biased, and I can't stand this kind of stuff. This is why I hate the media.
I don't have many tinfoil hat conspiracies, but one tinfoil hat conspiracy I have is, I don't know at what point it's going to happen, if ever, but down the road, maybe after we're all long gone, it'll come out that Tom Cruise and his relationship to Scientology was another gig. It was another acting gig. And he was paid for whatever reason to support Scientology. Now, you could argue that that makes him a shitty person because of what Scientology does to families and to people. And I don't know if that's me trying to justify in my head why he's supporting something.
It's complicated. It's a complicated relationship that I have with him as a fan of his work. Barring him, like, literally getting caught with a child. And I mean, seriously, so he is involved in an organization that's caused harm to people. But my challenge to everyone is, when they do that, then you cannot like any actor that's a Catholic. Is every Catholic actor, and trust me, there's a lot of actors and actresses and artists that are associated with Catholicism. Yeah. So now, do we hate all of them, or any Christian faith, the Christian Crusades people? Like, how far back do we go where we keep saying like the sins of the religion are the sins of the members?
The other funny thing is, no matter who it is, with maybe the exception of Tom Hanks, if you peel that onion back enough, you're going to find something to be outraged with about them.
Sure,
we're all humans.
Don't look at me. Yeah, don't look at me. I'm just not. The thing is, I'm not a celebrity, but if I was,
but nobody is infallible. That's part of being human. Is we all have aspects of our character that could potentially turn us off to other people.
Of course.
Before you take moral high ground on anything, like, you need to really step back and say, are you really in a position to judge this person, or are you just trying to what do they call it? Virtue signal?
There's a lot of virtue signaling, and I totally agree with you. And this even goes into politics, all that stuff. And I'm not going to say anything about like people. I'm just saying it's just amazing where you get these people on their, I hate the term keyboard warrior, but the sense of people online or on the keyboard, they'll point the finger scorn at celebrities. Just don't go to their films. You don't buy their music. If you don't like Taylor Swift, just don't buy her stuff. You don't have to shame her. You don't have to call disparaging things about her. Or same with Beyonce. Or Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks or anyone, just don't go to their films. You just don't have to go. It's not a big deal. Like, it's really weird that people get so they want to tear down these celebrity heroes. I know that's a weird human, I don't know if nature's the right word, but the idea that see our heroes fall is a real thing. There's a reason why that term exists, because there seems to be some sort of mob mentality glee to see people fail and fall. Yeah, that's part of the deal you sign to be a multimillionaire and be a celebrity. Is, unfortunately, for better or for worse, we're gonna know what your favorite flavor of ice cream is, and we might know your bedroom activity at the same time.
Yeah, I think a great illustration of Tom Cruise's passion for film is that outburst he had during, I believe it was when they were filming Top Gun Maverick during COVID.
During COVID, yeah.
There were very serious restrictions.
Yeah, at the time, yeah, there was, yeah.
And I think there was a clip, I believe the clip on set was somebody had broken protocol.
They broke the rules. It was visible, and Tom was like...
basically him unleashing, saying, hey, listen, you're going to fuck with hundreds of people's livelihoods here.
Yes.
Cut that shit out. That's a great example of a celebrity freak out, where you put that in contrast to like the Christian Bale freak out. And it
still makes you kind of chuckle. It's like he walked in his line.
Yeah, the Tom Cruise one is it's justified. Top Gun Maverick, people say it saved Hollywood or whatever. A lot of movies have saved Hollywood. Deadpool and Wolverine saved it recently.
Well, saved Marvel's what that one did.
Yeah. But I mean, he put his ass on the line, and a lot of filmmakers won't do that. I think at the end of the day, he is probably our last true movie star.
I think so. And I will say this. I know people might be listening who disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm just saying I enjoy his films. His personal activities outside of criminal, I'm talking about truly criminal behavior that he himself has done. Show me the receipts. I'll look into it. I seriously will. It's complicated. I think he's a great movie star, and barring anything like actual criminal, especially with children, at this point, I'm enjoying his films. And
well, it's funny because I think you mentioned children. I don't believe he has a relationship with his daughter.
It's complicated. That's the thing. At the end of the day, like you're saying, Craig, he's also just a human being.
Yeah.
Does he have problems with his marriages and ex-wives and kids? Yeah. So should we hate him? You know how many co-workers I work with that are either children or the products of divorce and broken marriages and homes? I'm in the military. How many do you think I work with? Do I hate them all because they're divorcees? Well, no, that's ridiculous. And they have complicated relationships with their ex-wives and their children as men and women. But there's not celebrities. That's all. They're just not multimillionaire celebrities. They're just humans with complicated marriages and exes. So is Tom Cruise. Yeah, so now Dave Grohl. Like, everyone's got some issues, man. But doesn't mean Dave Grohl doesn't have a good rock song. It just means he stepped out on his wife and he's got to work out with his wife now. But you can still listen to his rock song. He's not an evil person. He's just paying the consequences. Complicated person, but I like it. I like the discussion. Let's get into what Ed has to say about the film.
I really wanted to read his book before we sat down, and I just hadn't had a chance. But
I'm kind of giving the snippets for the podcast. And I want to say I don't give everything, obviously. I usually just keep the clips that are talking more or less about the actors. He does get into some of the behind the scenes of how the film was made, some of the hiccups. It's amazing, even at Ed Zwick's time and even having Tom on this project, how the movie company gets their pot. Like, just get out of our way. All right, so the first clip just goes into Ed's second attempt at sending the script to Tom. He was so excited to have this script, and he always had Tom Cruise in mind to play the role of Nathan Algren. He sent a rough, quick draft to Tom, and it's like doing a podcast and your first episode isn't that great, but you're so excited to get a podcast out there. People listen to the first episode, and I have that feeling with my first Rocky series podcast, Golden in the Distance. The first few episodes are horrible. Maybe the first year is horrible. And I wish I could go back in time with the knowledge I have now about podcasting and how to podcast. I think that ratio of listeners quitting at the first episode probably wouldn't have been as high, because a lot of people listen to the first one like, really? This guy can podcast? No, I can't. Not then. Maybe I can't now, but I think the ratio is lower now with other projects I've done, because you learn. So Ed's no different. He sent out a podcast. Sorry, he sent out a script quickly to Tom, but it wasn't ready. And Tom goes, no thanks. So he rewrote it after like almost half a year with John Logan, the two of them working on it together. And that's the story of his second attempt here.
Me and sending it to Tom Cruise again, along with a note I had written to accompany it. Tom read it a week later and said he wanted to meet. I met with Tom in a house he was renting in Beverly Hills. To this day, he claims I was so excited about the movie I was jumping around the living room as I demonstrated the few sword kata I'd learned in my reading. I know I brought along all sorts of research, 19th century tinted photographs of samurai in full armor, enchanting Japanese prints of village life, snippets of cavalry officers' diaries. It's possible I even brought him a replica of a katana, a samurai sword, shameless as it sounds. We launched into a conversation about the script. He was full of ideas, challenging parts of the story, embellishing others. He wanted to discuss what he would need to learn: Zen and the way of the warrior, Japanese customs, the tea ceremony, the nature of ephemera, and the notion of a good death. It was my first glimpse into why Tom's career has not just had commercial success, but also such remarkable longevity.
When Tom's on board,
Yeah.
what do I have to learn? What do I have to know? What, like Japanese, meditation, sword fighting? What do I have to know?
He mentions Tom describing him being very animated in that 17-minute sit down with the two of them on the Blu-ray. Tom brings that up.
Oh, really?
So that's pretty funny.
Oh, cool. Okay, interesting. I'm gonna have to buy the Blu-ray, I guess. But I bet you that clip's on YouTube somewhere. I'll check.
As an ardent student of movies, he would watch at least one a night.
So there you go. Ed remembers that he was an ardent student of movies, and Tom would watch at least one a night. That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
This has given him a kind of second sight, the ability to see a movie from the audience's point of view, know what they're thinking and feeling, whether they're ahead of the plot, how to understand and toy with their expectations. Tom has what I've often seen in other stars, a stomach brain.
It's interesting. Yeah, I understand that analogy.
Something either tastes right to him or it doesn't, and he trusts those instincts utterly. What struck me most after I got to know him was his insatiable appetite to keep improving. After his breakout performance in Risky Business, rather than place himself alone above the title, he turned his movies into opportunities for a kind of paid apprenticeship, playing opposite Paul Newman, Dustin Hoffman, Robert Duvall, and being directed by such masters as Ridley Scott and Oliver Stone, Martin Scorsese, and Barry Levinson.
Brian De Palma.
In later years, that list would grow to include Steven Spielberg, Paul Thomas Anderson, Cameron Crowe, and Stanley Kubrick.
But it's interesting to bring up De Palma. You're right. I feel bad. Ed, shame on you. But that's why you're here, Craig, to set Ed straight, so I appreciate that.
Our conversation lasted for hours. Eventually, I realized it was getting dark, and I worried I'd overstayed my welcome, but Tom seemed game to keep going. I told him I had to get home and stood to leave. With the force of the wrestler he'd been in high school, he grabbed me by the shoulders and with inimitable intensity said, "We're gonna make a movie."
I just love that.
Yeah.
You can picture Tom the way he is, grabs Ed's arms. He held him like a wrestler. Like he felt the strength of Tom, and Ed's not a very big guy. He's just a small director, and he's like holding him. He's like, gotta make a movie. I just love that imagery.
Most movies that become well received or memorable have to start with passion and excitement. If you're starting a project and you're not excited at the prospect of what you're doing, why the F are you even doing it?
You just said money, paycheck.
Well, yeah, exactly. I would argue that anything that truly starts with that flame or that flicker of passion, even if you don't ultimately enjoy what was presented on screen, at that point it becomes like a personal choice.
So the next one is, I call this clip The Power of Tom Cruise.
The Last Samurai was an entirely different experience. The movie had a green light from the moment Tom said yes. It was like the no-bid cost-plus contracts I'd heard about between military contractors and the Defense Department. $1 million of R&D to scout locations, hire department heads, and figure out the logistics? No problem. A trip to Japan to do research and meet actors? Let us make the reservations for you. You want to shoot on 3 continents? Great idea.
That's the power he has. Now, it's funny, we talked about the Academy. Mm-hmm. His fellow actors, essentially, don't really want to nominate him for his role in the film. But boy, do movie companies...
Money talks, man.
Yeah. What Paramount, I guess, is a big supporter of him right now. Like, when his movie makes the talk on made over $1 billion in the theater. Mm-hmm. It's a business.
No, at the end of the day, everybody who's making a movie is looking at a return on their investment.
So I'm giving you 100 of my dollars that I
give me 120 back.
I want 150 back. And when you find out that the movie bombs, I've lost my $100. That's the gamble. I'm invested in this film. I'm a producer, or our company is giving you money, and now we don't have a return of investment. It's like, oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
But Tom Cruise signs onto a film. Like, Craig's got a script, and I'm like, oh, Ryan, I got Tom Cruise to star in my independent film. I'm like, oh, but I need $1,000 to get this thing going. I'll get you $1,000, man, if you can promise me back double that, because I think this film's going to do something. Like, that's how it's done. But then you say, well, I got this no-name guy, same script, Same quality of script, but you're like, I got this no-name actor. It's going to be his first film. Like, ugh, I don't know. Best of luck. I don't know if I can give you anything. Like, it's that's what they're saying. Tom Cruise, okay.
It's all track record. What you've been proven to do, right?
The next clip is a little bit of the casting of Ken.
To play a part like Katsumoto opposite Tom Cruise, it was assumed that Hiroyuki Sanada, often referred to as the Tom Cruise of Japan, would be cast in the role.
So that was my mistake. I apologize. There's a different actor that was the Tom Cruise of Japan.
Meeting Ken Watanabe, I was so taken with his blend of strength, humor, and emotional availability that I decided to cast him. I couldn't have known that after surviving a battle with leukemia years before, Ken had found himself in debt to shady managers.
There you go. That's what it was. So, medical bills, shady managers.
At the time, the Yakuza was heavily involved in the business. To pay them off, for several years he'd been obliged to play whatever roles on Japanese TV came his way, no matter how uninspiring. And it had hurt his career. In our early rehearsals, Ken seemed somewhat tentative. Day by day, as his self-confidence grew, so did Ken's performance. By the time we were ready to shoot, he had grown into the role, owning not just his size as the character, but as a leading man going mano a mano with the biggest movie star in the world.
Yeah, you wouldn't know that this was Ken's. This comes through in the acting and the directing and the performances, but yeah, you didn't feel that Ken was lower than Tom. Like you didn't feel that with the charisma on screen was matched, and that was perfect.
Yeah.
And you needed to have that. You needed to have somebody who could play the quote-unquote last of the samurais, this individual, the leader of the last samurai. You needed someone like Ken's personality, his charisma, all that stuff had to match Tom's, or else it's like, what's the point? You didn't feel like this guy was lesser than the combination of Tom Cruise's charisma. It comes through in his characters. You can't help it. Even if the character doesn't require Tom's charisma, it comes out when you're a movie star. And so Ken definitely matched that charisma for charisma. This next clip is Ed talking about Tom Cruise already practicing swordplay.
That night, Marshall and I arrived at Tom's house for a meeting, and were told he was down at the tennis court. We followed a winding path through the fog toward the sound of strange percussive whacks, each accompanied by loud guttural cries. Below us, we could barely make out 5 spectral figures hacking away at each other with wooden swords. Though principal photography was still months away, Tom was already working out every day, determined to do the scene where Algren takes on 4 assailants in a single take, without a cut, Chanbara style as in the old samurai movies. No stuntman was going to play his part.
Typical Tom.
Is this the scene, because I wanted to make sure we talked about this, where after it happens, he relives it?
Yes.
My wife asked me about this. I couldn't come up with a good answer. Why is it presented the way it is?
The why, I don't know. Good question. It's never explained. It's never used again throughout the film. And Ed, in his other films, because it's I'm going in order of his filmography here. I think this is just a early 2000s thing. I think this is a little bit of that film styling.
We got the coverage, so we should show it.
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing is that the character, Nathan Algren, has become so good at becoming a sword master at his time with the samurai that we see him take him out, but then it just replays how he got there in a slow motion type way. So it's kind of a weird, odd replay of the events that we watched in real time. I think it's to add a little bit of a popcorn moment for action fans in the theater.
From a character standpoint, it is almost like sort of like when you do a debrief after something or a post-mortem or whatever. The only thing I could sort of say is it was like precognition, but after the fact. He was reliving every moment to sort of maybe learn from it and see, okay, what could I have done better here, or what area can I improve on? He was doing an instant post-battle assessment.
Guy Ritchie did that kind of stuff.
It was weird though, man. It might be the time period. It might be
I think it is, because I remember thinking the exact same thing. So I'm glad you brought up. You are the exact same page. We're watching this film. There's nothing in the film indicates that we're going to have this type of scene. The scene happens, and then we never go back to that ever again.
Yeah. It was probably just they're like, wow, we did this and we have all this coverage. It would be a shame not to show it.
Yeah, I think all this practice, Tom, because that's what he's practicing for. I think Tom was proud of it. I think he probably talked to Ed, like, can we make this a little bit more, a little bit more popcorn again for the audience? Like, I took these guys out pretty quickly. If you do this in real time, it's going to be over very quickly, but I want the audience to see just how ballet stylish this really was, the intricate cuts and slices and movements and blocking. And
you need to create those couple of seconds where he isn't focused and that guy gets up and tries to sneak up on him. If you're not filling in that gap with anything, it would look weird, right?
It's a good scene. It's like having a turkey dinner, a beautiful Christmas turkey dinner, and someone just gives you a really yummy Subway sandwich in the middle of it. It's like, okay, I have a great dinner here, but it's just an out of place meal in the midst of a good meal all the same.
It is, but there's also the guy that sneaks up on him. He beheads that guy, right?
Yes, he does. He takes off his head. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about that too, because I think it was really cool because we have a couple of beheadings in this movie, and one that Nathan witnesses,
right?
But he's on sort of on the back of the horse after he's being taken away, and he sees the sort of the ceremony happening. The actual moment of the beheading happens behind a tree.
Yes, that's right.
I'm like, well, that's cool because we all know what's happening, and then
we don't have to see it necessarily.
Yeah, but then we do see it later on, and I thought, again, I've often acknowledged that I'm not intelligent enough sometimes to explain what's going on here, but there's something going on there because when Nathan beheads that guy, we see it.
You know why? There's a difference. The one beheading that he witnessed was a samurai honorable killing, the Harry Carey type thing. The idea that because it was Ken's character that did it to his general, that was the one that he left the samurai to be a modern army fighter for Japan.
Yeah.
And they fought with the samurai, lost that little battle. He got caught as a prisoner. He said to kind of redeem himself, give me a samurai's death to atone for my sins for betraying the samurai. So that's why he was killed that way. So it wasn't like done out of anger or self-defense, or it was like a ceremonial. Yeah. That's right. Reverence. This is a sacred, because Ken talks about that to Tom's character later, says, you saw this, but you don't understand the way of our people. You see this brutality. It's beheading that might be very brutal to you, the Westerner, to see. But for us, this is actually, that was his desire. And that was an honor for me to do that to him.
And what do you want?
To know my enemy.
I've seen what you do to your enemies.
The warriors in your country do not kill?
They don't cut the heads off defeated kneeling men.
General Hasegawa asked me to help him end his life. A samurai cannot stand the shame of defeat. I was honored to cut off his head. Many of our customs seem strange to you, and the same is true of yours. For example, not to introduce yourself is considered extremely rude, even among enemies.
But for Nathan's play by Tom, of course, for his fight against those five guys, that beheading was just like, this is combative finality. There's no, like, I'm fighting to survive, and just the head chopping there was more, again, for the action sequence, like, there's no honor. And those people were not fighting out of honor. There's a different kind of battle. This was not an honor killing. This was a battle killing.
That's what I love about really well-made films is in that case, there's some kind of duality going on there. Like I said, sometimes I might not be able to figure it out, but I can at least acknowledge that there was an intent there. And I think you just actually probably explained it a little bit in terms of why we approach that way. But it was definitely something I noticed and responded to.
Nice. Well, I'm glad I said something smart on the show for once. All right. The next scene is some more praise for Ken.
I was especially pleased as Ken's sense of humor began to inform his performance. Over the course of a taxing shoot, that quality would prove to be a saving grace. He is one of the most delightful, soulful men I've ever met.
High praise?
Yeah. We actually get to see a little of that comedy and sort of that
definitely
that stage play that they do right before the ninjas attack. And by the way, it's a testament to this movie that we've talked about a lot of the awesome stuff in this movie, and we didn't talk about the fact that there's a whole sequence that is ninja versus samurai. Like,
I know, you're right. There is a whole battle sequence between ninja versus samurai.
Yeah,
I mean, very cool. And that's right. So the ninjas aren't honorable. They hide in the dark. They're assassins, whereas the samurai fight in the open. They fight for code and honor and all that stuff. The ninja, they're evil compared to the samurai's way of living. Yeah, for sure. just how good the film looked. Do you want to talk about just how the film generally just looked? I love the cinematography.
Yeah.
I felt like I was in Japan, even though it was filmed in New Zealand. I love that scenery, the farms, the lands, the house, the little community. I wanted to live there with Nathan. Didn't you want to go back and live there?
Absolutely. It's presented in that true widescreen format, that 2351, which is that sort of very, very wide aspect ratio. The production design. No, I mean, you can tell that whatever money was spent on this film is up on the screen.
We forgot to mention the ages. Tom Cruise was 41 at the time of this film. Ken was 44. And we didn't mention the actor Timothy Spall. We did a little bit, who plays Simon Graham. He was 46 at the time of this film.
Yeah, he looked every 46 years of his age.
He did look. He was 46. Correct me if I'm wrong. My kids recognized him, funny enough. They go, that's the mouse guy from Harry Potter or whatever.
Yeah, I actually know him from Almost Famous. Was he in Almost Famous?
I don't know. I've seen that film, but Kate Hudson in that film too?
Yes, she was.
Yeah, that's the only two actors I can remember from that film off the top of my head.
Jason Lee.
Oh, of course. Yeah, right.
Yeah. But either way,
let's talk about Cameron Crowe. Let's talk about another director. I'm just joking.
Timothy Spall was like early 2000s. He was doing a lot, and it's funny. A friend of mine, he recently was promoting, I think, a home video release of that one of his friends had worked on. That was like an early Timothy Spall movie. Like 85 or something. And I was like, and I replied, I was like, oh my God, I've never seen a young Timothy Spall before. Yeah. And it was wild to sort of see like a 20-year-old Timothy Spall. He's a good actor.
He's fine. He did a great job. Yeah. So, I mean, he did a great job as the kind of the bumbling journalist who kind of seems, not to say lazy, but he's kind of content to stay out of trouble, but he ends up being kind of very involved. He helps with the escape of Ken's character later in the film. So, he has that redeeming arc to his own character.
He was either in Almost Famous or Rockstar, the Marky Mark movie. That was kind of like the Judas Priest story.
I actually like that film. I don't know.
I loved Rockstar, man. That was another one I saw in theaters. It came out like a week before 9/11.
What happened 9/11? What was that? What year was that? Yeah, he was in Rockstar. You're right.
Okay. So, yeah, he wasn't in Almost Famous, but there's somebody in Almost Famous that is very Timothy Spall-like.
Okay. No, I don't see Almost Famous.
No.
It was Rockstar.
It was Rockstar. Yeah.
That's funny. Okay. All right, moving on. Oh, wait, this next clip is when they went back to LA to do some further. So they shot some in Japan, some in New Zealand, and a lot of the stuff in New Zealand actually for the Japan scenery. They then, of course, did shots in LA at the sound studio.
Okay, I was wondering what that third continent was.
It was LA.
Yeah, okay.
And there were some visitors when Tom Cruise came back.
On the first day of shooting in Burbank, I happened to glance behind me and see Steven Spielberg. Moments later, David Fincher appeared, and then Cameron Crowe. How coincidental that they'd all just happened to be on the lot that day. I would later discover each was courting Tom to be in their movies, and this was a chance to get a bit of face time. I will confess to being the tiniest bit self-conscious giving direction with that intimidating trio on my six, as they say in Top Gun. But their visit prompted an oddly charming and very revealing reaction from Tom. While Fincher, Crowe, Marshall, and I were chatting behind my chair, the still photographer asked if he could take a picture. Tom must have been with Spielberg at the time, but when he heard about it, he asked for a copy and had himself photoshopped into the shot. Apparently, even movie stars have FOMO.
That's funny. The only one that was successful there was Spielberg, right? He was probably courting him for War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds would have been after, yeah. Well, Cameron Crowe was Jerry Maguire.
Well, they did Jerry Maguire, which was years earlier.
But maybe they were talking about a different film. Maybe.
Yeah, and David Fincher, they never worked together.
That would have been an interesting collaboration, David Fincher and Tom.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate Steve and Tom, they fell out.
But they made 3 movies together?
Yeah, it was Cameron Crowe, Vanilla Sky as well. So I guess he was looking for a third film with Tom. Yeah. But that being said, it was Tom's fault, according to Steve. And I understand, but he got a little bit too it was too much with the Katie Holmes Scientology thing. It was he's calmed down about it. Like you don't hear Tom talk about them.
No, it's funny. There could have been that. He had a couple of career-ending moments, jumping on the couch on Oprah.
Yeah,
like there was that very small window where he was entering like Charlie Sheen territory.
Yeah, getting all excited on camera about Scientology. Yeah, it's been memed and stuff. I get it. Like it's been memeified. But the last 15 years, I would say it's damage control. That's fine. It's his right as a but his PR team has worked in overtime. But you don't hear any other than he's a member of Scientology. I haven't seen any new clips or any kind of like. And he doesn't bring to a set anymore. Like I don't think it's ever brought up at Mission Impossible sets or anything like that. But it was brought up at I think it was the War of the Worlds movie where because Minority Report was first, then it was War of the Worlds. He had a pavilion or something set up on, and Spielberg's like, "That's too much. It's enough."
Yeah, I didn't realize they had a falling out. Yeah, they also have a connection through Stanley Kubrick. Tom and Nicole worked on Kubrick's last film, but then also Spielberg made one of Kubrick's unmade films, which was AI.
Which I thought was a great film.
Yeah.
It's different, but I saw it in the theaters. And I ordered it on DVD, and I've watched it I would have loved to watch that one again. That's an interesting one. Okay.
And anxiety mainlining peanut M&Ms at the craft services table when Tom ambled up. He greeted me with his usual peppy, "How's it going?" I wasn't in a mood to respond in kind. "I don't know," I moaned.
Ed just had a big hiccup with the production. Essentially, he got some really bad news. That's in his audiobook. He explains everything. So he's just kind of like not in a proper headspace. He's like, ugh, right now. So, but Tom comes up with this normal, how you doing there, Ed? Type thing. And that's what's happening here.
The sequence isn't really working. Those stupid guns are killing us. We're already behind, and I'm worried we're going to have to come back and reshoot at least half of it. He listened as I went on. Then he looked off into the night. That was all he said before touching my shoulder and walking away. I stood there confused. Couldn't he tell that I was upset? Had he been in this situation so many times that he just took it in stride? It was then that I began to realize the gulf between my experience and Tom's. No matter how many movies I'd made until then, no matter how many battles I'd had with studios or times I'd gone over schedule, there was still some part of me that needed to be a good boy. When I ran into Marshall, I recounted my non-conversation with Tom. Marshall smiled and said he knows there's not going to be a card in the credits that says, "This movie was made on schedule." He touched my shoulder exactly the way Tom had done and headed back to the set. Later that night, as I was setting up a shot, Cruise was passing by and stopped. "How you doing, boss?" "Better," I said. "Good. Good. You know what we get to do tonight?" "What?" "Make a movie."
That's great.
Forgive me if I missed it. Who is this Marshall he keeps mentioning?
Oh, that's been his partner for decades. They did 30-something together. He's a collaborator throughout the years.
Okay.
He's a close friend and collaborator. Yeah. Yeah. So Marshall was a producer on this film too, but I love how there's going to be no credit where it says that this film was filmed on time or not. Like, just make the movie. Tom comes back. "How we doing there, Ed? You know what we get to do today? We get to make a movie." Don't you want that for your boss? Someone who's like, "Hey, let's get down to business. Let's have fun. Let's work hard. But guys, we're making a movie. Like, it's a blessed life, guys. Let's keep ourselves focused here. If you're having a bad day, remember we're making a movie. Like, this is not a bad gig." This next clip is just more talk about the cast.
As he walked away, I realized I'd missed the subtext of our earlier interaction. It had been Tom's non-confrontational way of reminding me I was the director, and that directing was a samurai job.
All right, so that was the last bit of that. I forgot about that, but that's great. Great way to cap that off. Okay, now on to the cast.
In addition to the Japanese cast, I had hired Tony Goldwyn as Colonel Bagley, Algren's former superior officer in the 7th Cavalry. Tony, a talented director himself, was a joy to be with on set and off, while Billy was irrepressibly funny in the way I imagined working with Robin Williams must have been. At times, I literally had to beg him to stop making us laugh so we could get back to work. Ken Watanabe's commanding performance continued to thrill me, while I came to count on Sonata's vast experience in martial arts, known as Seiten wo Tsuke, pardon my pronunciation, literally reach beyond the blue sky, to help me stage the many fighting scenes. Koyuki, the actress playing the role of Taka, Algren's reluctant host, was the greatest revelation. Her understanding of period behavior was expressed with exquisite simplicity and elevated every scene.
She was amazing playing the widow that Tom Cruise created, his character created, and their relationship was done. It's a trope, I know, but of course they fall in love. He's going to go live with her in the family at the end. That's fine. I'm fine with that ending. Don't get me wrong, but lovely actress. She really carried the role of kind of like get this guy out of my house to the brother to, falling in love with him herself. I thought she handled that role very well. It always felt like it worked throughout.
It wasn't overt, and it wasn't, sometimes performances like that could be like too on the nose. There was a subtlety to her performance. But I do want to point out that little kid. And I think a lot of times kid actors can be so good because they're pretending. And a lot of people forget how to pretend as they get older. And that's why a lot of kid actors don't grow up to be great adult actors. But this little kid, man, like that scene where the tear comes down, I don't know if that was movie magic or if he really generated that tear, but either way, he was great. And I think there's two key scenes. The one where he has that tear where he says he doesn't want him to go. But then there's that other scene they have on the porch where they talk about fear and battle. Nathan sort of says, every time I was out there, I'm afraid. That kid stood toe to toe with Cruise in both of those scenes. I have no idea what that kid went on to do. In that movie, he did his job and he did it well.
You know how they got that tear down his face? They whipped him just like they did Denzel.
If I'm remembering the scene correctly, I think it had to be a real tear because it's a wide shot and there's no cut. Like
no CGI.
The tear just comes down. I'd imagine the kid was imagining like his dog being, taken away or not getting ice cream or something. But either way, good job, and I wanted to acknowledge it. And also I wanted to pinpoint that great scene where it was, Nathan taking on the fatherly role there and teaching a lesson to that kid that his dad should have been able to teach him.
Yeah, well said.
With Tom was joyous, challenging, and exhausting. His energy was intimidating. It may sound surprising, but the one formative experience we had in common was that we both had wrestled in high school. Like all wrestlers, we shared a tolerance for hard work and punishment. Tom was in every scene for 120 shooting days, yet he never showed the slightest sign of fatigue, not even after getting the shit kicked out of him by Sonata, take after take in the mud and pouring rain. Tom likes to think of himself as being chased by a shark, which he means metaphorically, I hope. His mantra when giving notes is, how can we ratchet up the pressure on my character? By which he means he wants a bigger shark.
If you listen to previous episodes on this podcast feed, if you haven't, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to it because Ed Zwick's experience with actors is quite interesting. Denzel and Tom, I think, come from the same school of hard work, get the job done, keep your nose to the grind, and keep your nose clean. Tom even had a greater than Denzel to some degree of just the love of the movie making, the magic of the movie making, the passion. Yeah, he's got nothing but good things to say about Tom Cruise. I mean, do you think this is an experience that all directors have with Tom? What do you think?
I think so. Again, and that goes hand in hand with the fact that there's no clear paycheck movie. The one thing probably directors can take comfort in when they're working with him is knowing that Tom's not going to need too much of their attention. There's 8 million other things a director needs to worry about. And
Tom isn't one of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably elevates the director too, in a sense. If you have
absolutely somebody you're like, shit, I have to match this intensity, and also it's having an ally as well, right? Instead of
absolutely,
I mean, you've even talked about on this show about actors that weren't really allies and were more adversaries, and made the process difficult.
Oh, excellent point. Yeah. So this next clip is the scene that you were talking about with Tom's character talking to the young boy on the porch, and they only had like basically a very limited amount of time because they were using the natural sunlight you see in the film of the nighttime dusk coming in. So they knew they had to make this shot kind of count, that Tom had to show the emotion that he shows on the scene of feeling the sad and the tenderness towards this child. And Ed knows that Tom is intense. He kind of talks about how he doesn't really tell Tom how to act because of whatever he tells Tom will do it 100 times more, almost too, not to say too much, but the director's job is to know, what do I have to tell this person to give them, to have them do what I need them to do. So for Tom, he doesn't really have to give him much direction on how to act, but he really wanted Tom to be tender in this moment, not too, Tom can get kind of intense or very, So this is where Ed dials down Tom as much as he can for this shot that they have very limited time on.
Talk to me about your son, I said. He looked at me surprised. I knew Connor had just returned to L.A., and Tom wouldn't be seeing him for a while. For a moment, he was quiet, and then he began to talk. It doesn't matter what he said in those few short moments of the fading light. I watched as he looked inward, and a window seemed to open, and his eyes softened. Go, I said, gently nudging him into position on the porch. He nailed the scene with the depth of feeling I had loved in his best performances. I should also mention his Japanese pronunciation was spot on. The light was gone. The 80 called wrap, and as Tom walked past me on his way down the mountain, he caught my eye and mouthed, "Thank you."
Cool little moment there between director and actor about getting that actor in that moment, right? That's what the director needs to do to get them in that moment for that scene.
I had no memory of Connor.
Oh.
It's funny, on that sit down on the Blu-ray, they talk about both being fathers to sons.
You're right.
And I was like, did Ed make a mistake there? Because I only knew of the kid he had with Katie Holmes, and I didn't realize that he had a kid with Nicole Kidman. I just Googled it right now while we were listening to that clip. Last night, like I said, when I watched that interview, I'm like, oh, maybe Ed just messed up.
Well, Connor was adopted. He's only had one kid biologically, and that's Siri with Katie.
Yeah.
The other two were adopted with Nicole, but still.
Yeah, I didn't remember that. And you know what? That's funny. That's like another sort of sign of how our media has changed, because probably when they adopted Connor, paparazzi wasn't what it was. And, all the attention on celebrities' private lives weren't as much of a focus as, it is now. So it's just funny. Until just now, I had no idea that Connor Cruz existed, or whatever last name he uses. I don't know if he uses.
It is he goes by Connor Cruz. He's on Instagram. He's a big. He is an avid fisherman. He has 55,000 followers on Instagram. Yeah. He goes by Connor Cruz, and
which Cruz is a stage name though too. Like Tom Cruise's real name is like Mothapar or something.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Maybe he's legally changed it, to be honest.
Yeah,
I don't know at this point.
I don't begrudge the guy at all. I mean, why wouldn't you lean into having that name?
So I was going down just to see, when do we see a picture of daddy and son here together? Not that you have to have tons with your dad when you're an adult, but I finally got to one. He posted this January of 2013 on Instagram. Throwback Thursday, watching the Yankees beat the Dodgers a couple years back with my dad. It's him and Tom Cruise. There you go. So that was the last photo. It was posted 609 weeks ago. Hey, it's all right. I'm sure still his dad. I'm sure Tom takes care of him. Okay, last clip. Tom's excited again. That's what I wrote here.
Tom had insisted on being in the center of the crashing lines. It was a huge risk. Should an overzealous stuntman or a clueless extra make a horrible misstep, he could be seriously injured. That morning at dawn, I had stopped by Tom's Pain Cave, the trailer where he and Ken worked out in preparation for the action sequences. Tom had worked hard to build a rapport with Ken, knowing the stronger his co-star's performance, the better his would be too. I wanted to make sure Tom knew what he was getting himself into being in the center of that charge. Before I could finish my words of caution, Tom grabbed Ken's shoulder in one hand and mine in the other and practically shouted in our faces, "Do you know what we get to do today?" Ken yelled back without hesitation, "We get to make a movie."
So it tells me that's something that Tom probably said more than twice. If Ken could finish Tom's, which is a great way to end that chapter of Last Samurai, of the infectiousness of Tom, that now you have Ken finishing the sentiment, we get to make a movie.
Have you ever heard or seen clips of Quentin Tarantino movie set?
Like behind the scenes?
Yeah, the reason I say that is because Tarantino has a very similar... There's footage from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where the entire crew, when they're about to do probably what's going to be a complex, hard day, "Why are we doing this?" And then everybody shouts out, "Because we love movies."
Perfect. In my opinion, he's never made a bad film. So what does that tell you? He makes it for the audience. He makes it for himself. But Quentin, one of my favorite directors, you've already tackled that with the director Quentin Tarantino on your show. You have a show called Conversations at Jackrabbit Slims. I love that show, and I miss you doing that, by the way. I still have it in my podcast library, hoping I'll see a new episode pop up.
Well, it's funny. Next month is the 30th anniversary of Pulp Fiction.
Oh, there you go. Sounds like you got some work to do. All right.
Well, thankfully, our friend Scott has picked up the mantle and has done a lot of coverage.
That was my last guest co-host on the Siege episode, where he runs a couple of podcasts himself. One of them is dedicated, of course, to Quentin Tarantino.
The Church of Tarantino, isn't it?
You and I are talkers. I'm not surprised. This is probably my longest recording. I'm not complaining, just stating the fact. Craig, you and I could talk forever in a good way, and I hope our audience enjoyed our conversations.
Well, they better, because we've got 2 more of these.
Yeah, if you don't like what Craig offers, if you don't like what I offer, I don't know why you're listening to my podcast. If you don't like what Craig has to offer, yes, unfortunately, Craig will be, or fortunately, depending on which side of the fence you're on, I should say, you'll be back again. Remind me, let's see if I got it right.
We're doing, is it Pawn Sacrifice?
You're doing Pawn Sacrifice. Is that the one, Pawn Sacrifice? And you're doing the second Tom Cruise film, Jack Reacher,
Never Look Back. Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's going to be an interesting one to discover and talk about, because it's just completely different than what we just went over. So, Craig, tell people where they can find you.
I really don't have much of a social media presence anymore. I'm not active on any of the Twitter or X or Blue Skies or anything like that. I do have an Instagram, which I think if you search Mr. Craig Cohen, MR, you can find that. But aside from that, you can find my podcast in your favorite pod service. If you search the G.O.A.T. De Palma, or Conversations at Jackrabbit Slims, or Big Screen Book Club, or the Slycast.
You have a link tree or something like that, right?
I do. I will send you that, Ryan, and you can use that. It's also got links to my music, which is incredibly fulfilling, even though nobody listens to it.
Hey, it's like this podcast.
Yeah.
Nobody listens to it.
It's also got links to 2 video projects I did during COVID, which were super, super fun. I don't know how familiar you are with these either, Ryan, but they're linked. I did a history of the Ramones, which I kind of built like a midnight movie. And then I also did another one dedicated to the Beach Boys in the 1980s. The Beach Boys are one of my favorite bands. So looking at one of their less artistically fulfilling eras was kind of fun. So, I'll send you the link to the...
Please.
It's not a link tree. It's like one of those, the free version of Linktree.
Sure. But you click on it. If you click what's in the show, it'll take you to all of Craig's projects. Fair enough.
Yeah. But I appreciate that. And podcasting with you is always one of the highlights of my week. And also getting to know you through podcasting as well has been incredible. I look forward to the day where we get to shake hands and share a beverage.
Oh, we'll share something else, if you know what I'm saying. Why did I have to go like blue right at the end of this? We're doing so good. I was so professional, and I have to go blue. I'm sorry.
Well, if you come to Vegas, cannabis is legal here, so we can share a spliff or a blunt.
Oh, phew, I was thinking about something else. My apologies. Okay. Ooh,
there's a lot of stuff that's legal in Vegas, though. So
yeah, that's right. Hey, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Thanks, Craig. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.